What's up, my wizards? It's Dev from Mtg. We like magic, and after weeks of tweaks, I finally get to show you a deck based around my personal favorite legend in all of Dominaria. Here's blue-red Tetsuko, y'all. Hello again, from the other side of the intro. Well, yes, if pressed, I would say this is my favorite new legend in the entire set. And I knew since the day I saw her, literally the day the leaks came out, that this was the start of something special. Because unblockability, I am a sucker for. And the idea of getting a whole team through unblockable is just like, yes, that is perfect. So we'll play all 4 copies of Tetsuko. And yeah, I mean the full playset here, even though she's legendary, because all of our wildest dreams and best plans involve having a Tetsuko out. We're playing a bunch of creatures that are evasive on their own so that we don't necessarily need her out, but again, all of the best, most ridiculous stuff the deck can do involves having to have Tetsuko out. So I think we should play all 4 copies because we got to see her as consistently as possible. Cool thing though about Tetsuko is that you don't have to get her on turn 2 necessarily. Like, it'll help you set up, but sometimes the better plan is to develop your board before you drop Tetsuko, and then she'll have an immediate impact when you do drop her. You know, let's say you go turn 1, 1 drop, turn 2, 2 drop, turn 3, get your 3rd land, play Tetsuko and like a 1-mana haste guy. At that point, you're getting through unblocked with at least 3 creatures if nothing died during that time, so it's not bad. And even on later turns, turn 4, turn 5, if you top deck a Tetsuko, suddenly your entire team can get through unblocked, and that can clinch things up for you. By the way, another little piece of tech here, don't feel like you always have to swing in with Tetsuko, especially when playing against white decks that have Seal Away and Settle the Wreckage. Those are problem cards against us in general, but especially make sure that you don't expose Tetsuko to cards like that. You don't swing with her unless you absolutely have to. She does make herself unblockable, but it's only 1 point of extra damage, and really you'd much rather ensure that she stays around until the next turn than get 1 measly point of extra damage in, so protect her at all costs. Now, when you're building your Tetsuko deck, there are a few different directions you can go as far as what cards you play and what colors you play, and I'll talk a little bit more expansively about why I didn't choose certain things towards the end of the video, but one of the main reasons I went with red, there are really 2 big reasons, but the biggest one is actually the 4 copies of Bomat Courier that we should play. This is consistently the best card in the deck. Well, just like the mono red aggro decks and like vehicles decks that made this card famous, we also run out of cards really fast. We're playing mostly 1 and 2 ofs in this deck, really low curve. We're trying to empty our hand, and we do so by turn 5. So sometimes Bomat Courier can really help us get a refill, you know, get 2, 3, or even more cards sometimes. And that's statistically even more likely in this deck, where we have Tetsuko to get it through unblocked. Like, if you can get a Bomat Courier through unblocked every turn, you're stockpiling a lot of cards, and by the time it comes time to cash in, you're getting a lot of cards. So Bomat Courier is ridiculous in this deck. I'm also going to play 4 copies of Siren Storm Tamer in the deck because we need 2 things in this deck. We need cheap, small creatures that can get through unblocked if we have a Tetsuko out. And we need things to protect Tetsuko and other creatures. Like, let's say you're getting a bunch of cards rolled up into exile with Bomat Courier. You got 3, and they target your Bomat Courier with removal. Siren Storm Tamer can jump in front of that for you too. That's helpful. But mostly, we're looking to protect Tetsuko, especially in situations where we swing in and our opponent has a fatal push or a burn spell or something for Tetsuko. Because if we swing in and they kill our Tetsuko, now they can block all of our guys. So they can blow us out if they're able to kill Tetsuko at instant speed once we swing in. We want to keep that from happening, and Siren Storm Tamer is a great way to do just that while getting in damage of its own, too. And it's evasive by itself, so even if Tetsuko's not even out, it can still fly through for a couple of damage pretty consistently. So just about everything about Storm Tamer is good in this deck. I think we have to play the set. But more 1-drops are super aggressive. In case you have noticed, we're going to play 4 copies of Fanatical Firebrand as well, because this card is actually a lot of different cards. You know, it's a burn spell against a player sometimes. Other times it can kill a Lana Warel for a lot of different 1-toughness things right now. There's so many 1-toughness creatures, it's hard to even list them all. So in the early game, this can be really good for just blasting a path clear. If you need to, you don't have a Tetsuko out, whatever. You can get some of your guys through unblocked just by blasting their creatures away. And sometimes that's important, considering there are so many vulnerable creatures right now that only have 1 toughness. So it's an important card, and it's a small haste guy. And I like haste creatures in this deck because I discussed this play a little bit earlier. If you go turn 3, Tetsuko plus 1 mana haste guy, that's a good way to get a lot of damage through with a bunch of different creatures on that turn. So I like that we have 8 different 1 mana haste guys to facilitate exactly that. Now I'm going to play 2 Warkite Marauder in this deck. I wanted to play 4 at first, but the reasoning quickly becomes that if we have a Tetsuko out, we really don't care what the opponent has on the other side of the field. So Warkite Marauder's ability when it attacks just doesn't matter as much. So I think 2 copies is right here, but it is still a 2-power flyer. You know, if you got a Tetsuko out, it's guaranteed to get through for 2 every turn. It's important to have a couple of slightly bigger creatures in the deck that take advantage of Tetsuko also being able to get 1 toughness creatures through. So I like that about it. And even if Tetsuko's not out, it flies. So that's good. So this is another card where it does a lot of cool stuff, but I don't think we use its ability to its maximum potential or anything. So I'm just going to run a couple of copies. But I am going to play 4 whole copies of Earthshaker Kenra in the deck, even though it doesn't necessarily, just like Marauder, it doesn't look like we get the full value out of this card all the time either. If we've got a Tetsuko out, who cares about making a creature not be able to block? You know, they're not blocking anything anyway. But I really like how aggressive this card is. It's much better in the early game than a card like Marauder usually is. It's got the haste, that's really important. And it's often a better play on turn 2 than Tetsuko is if you've got both in your opening hand. You know, you go 1 drop on turn 1. Turn 2, Earthshaker, use its ability, get both of them through, your 1 drop and your Shaker. Then turn 3, drop Tetsuko, and maybe another creature, and just get everything through. So I think that this leads to much better starts than a creature like Marauder too. Just as far as I'm concerned, this is the real money shaker. Now, I'm also going to play 2 copies of Kari Zev here to finish off the 2-drop slot. I only want to play 2 copies of this, mostly because it's legendary, but I do think you could fit a 3rd copy. It's a pretty important card because it does a lot of damage, especially if we have a Tetsuko out. You know, it's guaranteed to do 3 damage because both her and the monkey get through unblocked, guaranteed. So 3 damage is actually pretty good every turn for 2 mana. So I'd like to play more copies of this, but the deck list is really tight. Don't really know that I want to make room for a 29th creature, you know, so I think the 2 copies is fine, but she is definitely one of the better 2-drops in the deck. But to finish off the creatures, we'll look at the only 3-drop we're playing, and that's the 4 copies of Combat Celebrant, because we have to, right? Like, this is the other big reason to play red in the deck. This is like 65% Bomat Courier, 35% Combat Celebrant, and I thought those numbers would be switched at first, but Bomat is just ridiculous with Tetsuko, or even if Tetsuko's not out. Combat Celebrant kind of sort of has to have Tetsuko to be at its full potential, but note that it doesn't have to get through for combat damage or anything to give you another attack step. You just have to exert it. That's actually a relatively low cost. And it's just like the biggest creature in the deck, period. You know, if you have a Tetsuko out, then this gets through for 4, guaranteed, you know, whether or not you exert it and then get all your other creatures through a second time. This is still doing pretty big damage for you if you have a Tetsuko out. And it's a great, you know, curve play. If you go turn 2 Tetsuko, turn 3 Combat Celebrant, they have to figure out how to deal with that situation pretty quick or they are going to die. They're going to die to that. Now, believe it or not, I did leave room for 12 spells in this deck because I think we need them, starting with the 4 copies of Shock. Now, this is just a 1-mana answer to a ton of different creatures right now. You know, I've already talked about all the stuff with 1 toughness. Obviously, there's even more creatures that have 2 toughness, and you'd be surprised how many, like, good legal targets that Shock actually has right now. Plus, it can deal damage to Planeswalkers, and even against control, it's not dead. You know, sometimes if you get to double Shock games where you draw 2 Shocks, then this can deal that last few damage for you. You know, it's decent reach in some situations, but mostly it's going to be a way to clear a path before we get our Tetsuko, or if we didn't draw our Tetsuko in the early game. Clear a path for all of our little guys. It's really important to do that. And it keeps them off playing like huge stuff on turn 2 with their Llanowar Elves, which is an important play to point out right now. But I'm also playing 2 Unsummon in the deck. And originally I was playing 4 Lightning Strike, but I decided to take out the strikes and put in 2 Unsummon and 2 of the next card I'm going to show you. And I think that it's worked out for the best. You know, this is able to take care of all the big stuff that spells like Shock and Lightning Strike can't take care of. It's going to be really important for tempo when, like, let's say they play their Hazoret. Well, we can just deny them their entire turn 4, essentially, for 1 mana. That's awesome. Same thing with creatures like Lyra Dawnbringer. We really don't have any way of actually taking out a Lyra Dawnbringer in this deck at all. So this is just a 1 mana answer to get her back in the opponent's hand, and we can swing through freely for another turn. Sometimes that's all we need. And just for 1 mana, a pretty good deal. Plus, this is another way to save Tetsukos and stuff if we need to. Speaking of one-mana ways to save Tetsuko and stuff, I've actually worked 2 main deck copies of Spell Pierce into this thing, and I think it's definitely worth it. You should take this seriously, because right now, just about every, main board piece of removal has the potential of wrecking us. And we are a deck that wants to go really, really fast. So sometimes just a 1-mana investment for a Spell Pierce is going to put them off. Things like even Fatal Push, but especially spells like Fumigate and Settle the Wreckage, which is a spell we especially hate. Hate Settle the Wreckage, Seal Away. There's tons of stuff that a Spell Pierce can just completely deny them. Not to mention things like Planeswalkers. They'll go to play Teferi on turn 5 and we'll just be like, no, you can't have your Teferi. What are you, crazy? So Spell Pierce is actually a very important card right now. Because again, I've already brought this up, but if we swing in with all of our guys, leave Tetsuko back, they can still push it. They can still Fatal Push it or Lightning Strike it or whatever. In those situations in the early game, Spell Pierce is an extremely important card that's going to get you out of a lot of jams. So trust me on this. 2 Spell Pierce in the main deck is important. But we'll finish off the main deck here with 4 copies of Throne of the God-Pharaoh. It's actually in this deck. We've got enough creatures, and enough really cheap creatures too, to facilitate this. It's really, really good reach, and it'll have an effect on the game the turn that you drop it. There are going to be turns where on turn 4 or 5, you have 4 mana available to you, and you'll go, first main phase, Tetsuko, surprise, get through a bunch of dudes unblockable. And then second main phase, use the rest of your mana to drop Throne of the God-Pharaoh, surprise, deal an extra 4 or 5 damage to him during the end steps. So Throne of the God-Pharaoh is actually really good, tons of reach, and I think you could make a case for a card like Lightning Strike, or possibly even Invigorated Rampage over Throne. But Throne is good because it'll help you get extra damage over multiple turns, and those other cards won't necessarily let you do that. And for your 2 mana, this is usually worth more damage than a Lightning Strike. Even during one combat step in the somewhat mid or late game, turn 5, turn 6, this can convert into, anywhere between 3 and 5 damage relatively easily. That's already more than a Lightning Strike just in one turn. If it lasts any longer than that, sometimes this thing can do a bunch of damage for you over the course of the game. Now, we're playing 20 lands in this deck. Again, curve is super, super low here. We only really ever need to get to 3 lands, and a lot of the time we don't even necessarily have to do that. The deck can operate pretty well off of just 2, so we don't necessarily have to have all the lands in the world, and we really don't want to flood. So I think 20 is right. Right here we have 15 blue sources and 13 red sources. Especially after boards, we've just got way more blue cards, so I think we need to sort of balance it towards blue. But aside from that, I think this is what we want to do. I don't think we have to get much fancier than this, and I think you do, though, have to get these 2 dual lands. If you don't, you probably want to add a couple of lands to the deck if you're just replacing them with basics. But let's check out this sideboard right here, and honestly, this is fairly cut and dry. We've got extra counter spells in here, and kind of a lot of them. We'll finish off the entire playset of Spell Pierce when we know we're playing against Settle the Wreckage and other similar cards, Fumigate and such. But we've also got a copy of Negate in there to do the same thing, and a copy of Admiral's Order to do the same thing. This is especially good against Settle the Wreckage because it virtually guarantees that Wreckage will get countered, almost no matter what turn we're on. So I like Order in the deck as well. We've also got Hope of Gyrippur in there as an extra threat against control and just a way to fight off sweepers. If we sniff out a Fumigate on the next turn, then Hope of Gyrippur can be a good way of stopping exactly that from happening and helping us get in another big swing. We've got the extra Unsummon in there for when we're dealing with decks that play a lot of big threats that we have to deal with and don't really have other ways of doing it, so we'll just try and swing the tempo and gain advantage that way. Sometimes one turn is all you need. One extra swing, especially on turn 4 or 5, is worth a lot of damage, so again, just returning Lyra Dawnbringer to their hand for the 1 mana is sometimes game. We've also got the Chart of Course in here. This is against control. A lot of this is against control, in case you hadn't noticed, but I like drawing extra cards against control. Chart of Course is a really good and efficient way of doing that. And finally, probably the most confusing card in the sideboard, all 4 copies of Essence Scatter. Now, against control, we really, really hate things like Settle the Wreckage and Fumigate. I've talked about that. But against mono red aggro, we hate Goblin Chain Whirler. Card is the bane of our existence. It sucks that red effectively gets a sweeper against us, and we're kind of bad against sweepers. So I want to have Essence Scatter mostly to counter Goblin Chain Whirler. That is the number one thing I'm worried about and I'm carrying Essence Scatter for. But I guess in games where you're worried about cards like Lyra or Glorybringer or whatever, you could sideboard in Essence Scatters, but I mostly save them for the Chain Whirlers. That card is super crazy good against us and can just end the game on the spot, so I want to carry an efficient way of answering it, and Essence Scatter is a pretty good way. Now, there's some stuff I didn't play in the blue-red deck, and there's some other directions that you could go in if you wanted to build this deck. So let's talk briefly about all that stuff. First of all, some things that are only slightly out of budget. We are playing cards more expensive than this, but I really wanted to spend less than $100 on this deck. So I didn't end up looking at Soulscar Mage. Well, I looked at him, but I didn't play Soulscar Mage or Champion of Wits in this deck. And I think that both of these are only a couple of bucks right now. I think Champion of Wits 3, Soulscar Mage is 2. But I do think there are cons to these cards, too, that kind of put me off playing them. We're not playing enough burn for Soulscar Mage, but if you added Lightning Strike, I think that it would definitely be a consideration. So keep an eye out for that. Or with Champion of Wits, I feel like this card is slightly too slow. And it's best, traditionally, in decks where you can take advantage of its discard ability somehow. Not only will you draw the cards, but you'll actually end up getting card advantage at some point in the game because you'll be able to get whatever you dumped in the graveyard back out. We don't have the ability to do that in this deck. So Champion of Wits, although it does help us draw into important cards like Throne and Tetsuko if we don't already have it, I just think it's not quite right for the deck. But I'm willing to be wrong on that. If you want to spend the $12 for a playset, it might be worth it to you. But it might also be worth it just to play a couple of copies and see how that works out. Now, there are a couple of budget options for this or just about any build of the deck that I didn't end up on, and a couple of them I want to talk about right now are Spellweaver Eternal and Aether Swooper in blue. I like Aether Swooper a lot, actually. You know, it's evasive too, so even if we don't have a Tetsuko, it can fly over for a damage somewhat consistently. And it makes a small creature. So when we do have a Tetsuko out, not only can it go unblocked guaranteed, but the servo can too. Or we can leave the servo up to chump block, whatever. I just think this is a pretty versatile creature that could be worth replacing Earthshaker Kenra if you don't have the money for Kenra or whatever. So for 5-10 cents, it's a pretty good option. Same thing with Spellweaver. Now, this and Soulscar Mage, what I like about them is the prowess. We are playing a number of instant speed spells in this deck, and again, you could add Lightning Strike over Throne if you wanted to, at which point prowess creatures are really good. With Tetsuko, because you can send them in, make sure that they go unblocked, and then start casting spells to boost their power. I think that'd actually be a really powerful plan, but I didn't think we had quite enough spells in this deck to make that plan work, but you could try it out. Now, as far as other color options for this deck, I'll just briefly touch on a couple of these. You know, everyone's talking about, well, not everyone, but a lot of people are talking about the blue-black Tetsuko deck that's Ratetsui is what we're calling it. That's what I've seen it called, at least. It's basically just the rats with Tetsuko because they have 1 toughness. You know, you can play as many of them as you want, and they'll get through for huge damage, at least theoretically. But honestly, I think that deck's a little bit cute, and I really like Tetsuko, and I think she has potential. And I don't want to waste her on a cute deck. I want to actually have her win if we're going to play her. I think that we can, but I don't necessarily think the blue-black rats deck is the way to do it. Aside from that, though, I think you could get off of blue-red if you wanted to and play blue-white because there's good options here, too. We've got good white 1-drops with 2 power like Sky Marcher Aspirant and Dauntless Bodyguard, but we've also got stuff like Adanto Vanguard and Adorned Pouncer even, you know? So I think there's really cool stuff, and Glorybound Initiate, should point that out, too. There's lots of cool stuff you could do in white. As well. So I think that'd be a good direction to try and go in, but honestly, I think all the best payoffs are in blue-red just because we get Bomat Courier and Combat Celebrant, and even Kari Zev. I just think these are the best ways to abuse a to abuse a Tetsuko right now. Now, here are your power rankings right here. A final score of 62, not too shabby, for a deck that's under $100 right now. But don't think that just because it looks like a mindless aggro deck that it plays as such. There are actually a lot of decisions you have to make when playing this deck, and any aggro deck. I've said before that aggro gets a bad rap for being mindless when it's not. There's tons of decisions that you have to make if you're an advanced aggro player. This deck is no different because we have creatures that we'd really, really, really like to protect. We have multiple ways of doing it, but knowing when to pull the trigger on protection spells or playing the creatures in the first place is kind of something you have to learn with time and with what you're playing against, knowing what to play around all that, you know. Again, usually Tetsuko is not the right play on turn 2. If you have just about any other 2-drop in the deck, you often want to play that instead of Tetsuko. So knowing when to actually play your Tetsuko and when to get the most advantage out of all your creatures is actually kind of a tough row to hoe. So it takes some time, but with some repetition and some games, this deck can actually be really, really devastating once you get things down. And I've got a lot of faith in it. Like I said, I've been working on this deck like since the night the leak dropped, son. That's like 6 or 7 or 8 weeks ago. It feels like forever at this point. So I've been enamored with Tetsuko for a long time at this point, been banging the kinks out of this deck for a good bit, and I think that I'm finally proud of what I can present you here. After a good bit of work, this has been sort of a pet project of mine, and at this point, this is sort of a daily driver. Like, I love this deck, and I work on it at least like 4 times a week in the midst of me working on other decks. So I really hope you like the end product, and if you've got any other suggestions for it, I'm all ears, because this is my personal favorite legend in the entire set. Can't help it. So if you've got other ideas, I'd really like to hear them. And if you're interested in viewing this deck list or ordering it, whatever you need from it, just click the very first link in the description box as usual. Just click show more, and then boom, links. Just click the first one. That'll take you over to the deck list on tcgplayer.com. They help sponsor my content. They're good fellas, and they're where you can get this deck the cheapest right now. I know I sound like a broken record, but they are the cheapest place you can get just about any deck. If you're trying to build a Magic deck right now, you know, a lot of sites this deck is well over $100 on, but you can get it for about $90 or $95 on TCG Player right now. So check out the link in the description if you want to do it. I hope you do, because again, this is one of my favorite decks in Standard right now. But I'm pretty sure I'm tapped out for this one. Make sure you do all the YouTube stuff for me if you would. Click like. Takes almost no effort. Also subscribe, ring the bell for the notifications. I know that's double the buttons it takes to hit like, but it doesn't take too long to help me out, you know. Follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev if you want to, or if you feel like it, throw me $1 on Patreon. There's a link in the description for that. $1 a month will get you into these polls that help determine what decks come out next, and you'll get to know what decks I'm about to do the day before I do them. Plus, this month, if you sign up at the $5 tier, not only will I send you out a signed card, but my wife just got me a box of Dominaria because she's the best wife there ever was in the world. Hey baby, I love you. We opened it up today. Got some cool pulls and stuff, and if you're at the $5 tier this month, everything that I send out is going to be from that box of Dominaria. So if you feel like it, you can toss me a $5, but all I really ask is the one. But I'm pretty sure I'm done on the subject of Tetsuko Umezawa for now. But don't think you've heard the last of her. This card's in Standard for a while, and I'm going to love her the entire time she is. So I'll probably revisit Tetsuko at some point. And if you have any ideas, again, please let me know. I'm all ears for those. So I think I'm done now, though. I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Remember to spread love and be kind.